Hey guys, tonight we're hitching up a Phaeton, tightening the buckles on a dream no one really approved of, and rolling into the forgotten lanes of 19th century New England. With a map you barely understand, a revolver you'll never use, and a whole lot of embroidery you'll never finish. You're one of two women, yes, ladies, about to set off alone on a journey through forests, ferry crossings, thunderheads, and towns that don't even have a proper inn. And if you're hoping for air conditioning or phone service, yeah, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the local time in the comments. It's always amazing seeing who's out there listening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lean into the carriage cushions. They're worn soft from use, the kind of softness that only comes from doing the thing people told you not to do again and again. Next to you, your traveling companion adjusts her hat, her gloved fingers brushing away the dust already settling on the brim. The sun's just rising over the Watchusett Hills, dappling the path ahead in gold and shadow. Your horse, Charlie, reliable, not fast, a little proud of himself, tugs gently against the reins. You're off. The first clatter of the wheels on the road sets something loose inside you. It's the kind of freedom that only comes with doing something both absurd and meaningful. You're not headed to a known destination. In fact, your plans are charmingly vague. Go south or maybe west until you've seen enough or run out of ginger cookies. Your bags are strapped beneath the carriage with rubber cords, just barely out of reach. You've packed the essentials, of course: sewing materials, letter paper or wrench, a bottle of oil, strong string, a fancy shawl for dinners you'll probably never attend, and the aforementioned revolver, which you placed carefully in a hidden pocket under the seat, just in case. You've also brought a map, not because it will help you, but because it might make you look slightly more official when asking a farmer, "Are we anywhere near Keene?" The town disappears behind you faster than you expected. The roads turn quiet. The sound of your own journey replaces all else. The squeak of the harness leather, the steady clop of hooves, the creak of wood that tells you your wheels are surviving another mile. Every bump in the road jolts something awake in you. It's summer, but the morning is cool enough for layers. You clutch your shawl close as you pass beneath a line of trees, their branches forming archways over the path. The smell of pine sap and wildflowers lifts through the air, carried by a breeze that whispers, "What on earth are you doing out here?" You'd ask yourself the same, but right now the only real answer is this: it feels good. By midday, you're somewhere in the Connecticut River Valley, following roads that don't always match the lines on your map. You expected lush beauty, instead you get sandy soil and fields full of tobacco. Farmers wave at you absently, as if ladies in carriages are a daily occurrence. They're not. You steer Charlie down a particularly hot stretch, wishing, just slightly, you'd packed a parasol instead of your third pair of gloves. There's a kind of ache in your legs from sitting too still, and you realize, too late, that your lunch basket is trapped under the seat with the bags. You consider getting out and crawling under the carriage to retrieve it, but then, blessings, a little tree casts a lacy patch of shade ahead. You stop. You breathe. You think of nothing except how strangely satisfying it is to eat lukewarm cheese and dry bread in the middle of nowhere. There's a crunch of birdsong nearby and the rustle of something bigger, probably a groundhog, or, if you're being dramatic, a mountain lion. Either way, you finish your sandwich and keep your revolver holstered. Later that afternoon, your tires hit the dirt edge of a ferry dock. You and Charlie wait as a broad wooden raft is pulled into place. The river before you looks calm, but deep, the kind of water that makes you hold your breath without realizing. As you guide your horse onto the planks, the ferry creaks in protest. A boy in rolled-up trousers grins and nods. "She'll hold," he says. You're not sure if he means the boat or the horse. Crossing the Connecticut feels like entering something ancient. The trees lean in, thick with summer heat. You exhale. You're not where you were and not quite where you're going. By the time you reach Brattleboro, a storm is already building. It starts with that eerie stillness. No birds, no breeze, just the smell of metal in the air. You pull up beside a stone wall, debating whether to cover Charlie or just ride through, and then lightning. Not elegant streaks, but sky-splitting cracks that turn the world silver and sharp. Thunder follows, and the downpour hits like a curtain falling all at once. You steer blindly towards the nearest shelter, a faded red barn whose door hangs open like it's been waiting for you. Inside, the smell of wet hay and dust hits you like an old memory. You and Charlie share the space with 2 startled goats and 1 very unimpressed rooster. You all wait. And when the rain finally slows, you step back into the world changed. Soaked, chilled, but undeniably alive. By evening, you're nearing Brattleboro. The road is soft from rain, and the sun reappears just in time to make the world look like a postcard. Every leaf shining, every puddle glowing like molten glass. You don't know where you'll sleep yet, but somehow that seems less important now. You'll find a way. You always do. That night, you sit on a porch somewhere, doesn't matter where, and write a letter by lamplight. You try to describe the mountain, the storm, the river, the way your heartbeat changed just watching the sky split open. You can't. So you sketch a fern instead. Tomorrow you'll climb Monadnock. But for now, your horse is fed, the stars are out, and for the first time in weeks, you feel like you're exactly where you're meant to be. The road unrolls beneath your wheels like a ribbon of half-forgotten promises, dragging you deeper into the strange contradiction of the Connecticut River Valley. Flat and winding, peaceful and stifling, lush and oddly monotonous. You're a few days in now. Charlie knows the rhythm, and you've gotten past the anxious stage of double-checking the harness every 10 minutes. The sun is high, the air thick with the scent of dust and drying grass, and your knees are sore from knowing absolutely nothing. You follow the valley south, hoping to spot the glittering ribbon of the river itself, but it keeps hiding behind rows of corn and tobacco, dodging your gaze like it's playing some slow-motion game of hide and seek. It's not quite what you imagined. You'd pictured sweeping views, maybe a hawk wheeling overhead, possibly a poetic breeze. Instead, it's hot, flat, and filled with more bugs than you think are strictly necessary. Historians still argue whether this stretch of the valley was once considered prime agricultural land or just a glorified weed patch with good PR. Whatever the truth, you're chewing a blade of grass and wondering whether that last turn actually brought you any closer to your vague destination or just deeper into the land of mosquito bites and lost perspective. Midday hits hard. You pull over into a shady copse of trees near a weathered stone wall. The air changes here, cooler, more watchful. You spread out a rough cloth, open your lunch basket, and reward yourself with apples and bread gone slightly stale from yesterday's heat. Somewhere nearby, a hidden brook chuckles like it's in on a joke you're too tired to get. As you bite into your apple, you spot a barn owl blinking at you from a low branch. For a second, the world hushes. Just you, the owl, the whisper of leaves. Then Charlie snorts and the owl decides you're clearly not interesting enough to observe further. After lunch, the terrain grows looser. Sandy stretches suck at your wheels. You catch the scent of something stronger than dust, sun-warmed tobacco leaves. Broad, flat fields stretch to the horizon, each one framed in low stone walls, each one less photogenic than the last. You pass a group of field workers, bent and quiet, their hats pulled low against the sun. One glances up, his face unreadable, and nods. You nod back. The road to Deerfield is long and dry, and you arrive covered in a fine film of sweat and road grit. It's not romantic. It's not scenic. It's real. That might be better. Deerfield, though? Deerfield is trying. White clapboard houses shaded by old elms, a village green that looks like it's auditioning for a calendar page. There's history here, even if you have to squint to find it. One local boy offers to show you where the raid happened, then changes his mind halfway through his story, distracted by the promise of pie. You thank him anyway. You were already imagining it better than he could explain.
By the time you reach Greenfield again, clouds are gathering behind you like the plot of a bad Penny Dreadful. The thunderhead is textbook, anvil-shaped, towering, backlit by a sun that clearly just wants to stir up some drama. Charlie senses it before you do. His ears twitch and he starts walking faster. You let him. It's not bravery. It's survival instinct. Then it hits. Not gradually, not politely. 1 second it's dry, the next you're soaked through like someone dumped a bucket straight from heaven. The sky turns a murky purple. Rain lashes down sideways. You shout something, probably go, and Charlie responds with all the speed his hoofs can offer. You don't steer, you just hold on. There's no shelter in sight, so you pick the best tree with the fewest ominous creaks and pull the phaeton beneath it. Bad idea, good instinct. It's one of those moments that makes you feel very small and strangely significant. The storm doesn't care about you, but you care about surviving it, which means sitting still, listening to every thunder roll like it's grading your courage. The storm breaks nearly as fast as it began. You're soaked, your boots are full of rainwater, and your map looks like it's been through an emotional breakup. But you're laughing, giddy. Adrenaline is a funny thing, especially when paired with the smell of wet leather and ozone. You head for Broadbrook next. It's less a town than more a suggestion. The kind of place you might miss if you blink, but you don't because something magical happens as you crest your eyes in the road. Ferns. Everywhere. Glimmering with leftover raindrops, fresh and impossibly delicate. Maidenhair, you think. A whole forest floor of it as if the storm washed them clean just for your arrival. You stop the phaeton, step down, sink your boots into the mossy edge of the path. And for a few minutes, you don't think about where you're going. You don't think about the storm or how soaked your clothes are or what weird thing you packed instead of dry socks. You just look. There's a French theory, no, really, that certain plants carry memory of places, that ferns in particular grow where old paths once led. The scholars dismiss it as pseudo-botany, but right now, you're inclined to believe the ferns remember travelers like you. You make camp that night in Keene, where someone's front porch serves as a drying rack for your shawls, your soaked gloves, and your thoroughly deflated picnic basket. The innkeeper's wife offers hot cider and laughs when you tell her about the owl. She once found a possum in her flour barrel, she says. Everyone's got stories. As the sun sets behind the ridge and your tea grows lukewarm in your hand, you realize something odd. The hard days are the ones that stick. Not because they're pleasant, but because they make everything else clearer. Tomorrow, you'll begin the ascent toward Jaffrey and Monadnock. Another climb, another layer of dust, another unpredictable horizon. But for now, you're here. Safe, sore, still smiling. And that's enough.
The road out of Keene curves upward in gentle suggestion at first, but soon becomes more confident in its ambition, pressing you toward the towering silhouette of Monadnock, like a polite but persistent usher guiding you to the main act. The mountain rises in the near distance, dark and slightly aloof, wrapped in low clouds from the previous day's storm. Charlie seems to sense the change, too, his steps more measured now, ears forward, alert not just to the gravel path beneath his hoofs, but to whatever's waiting beyond the tree line. You pass through Jaffrey with only a brief stop at the post office, just long enough to let the villagers give you a series of looks that range from admiration to bewildered concern. 2 women alone in a carriage asking about mountain trails like it's a Saturday errand? That's not something the good people of Jaffrey see every day. One older gentleman suggests kindly that the mountain is not hospitable today. A younger boy, clearly impressed, adds, "You're going to try it anyway, aren't you?" You are. You leave your bags behind at the hotel, a white clapboard structure that smells like wood smoke and lemons, and repack only the essentials: biscuits, extra shawl, pocket knife, a water flask you're pretty sure leaks a little. No map of the trail, just stories passed along in the dining room over breakfast. It's been raining for days. The trails, you're told, are like waterfalls now. You're told this with grave, knowing expressions. You say thank you, then lace your boots tighter. The trailhead is nothing more than a break in the ferns, a thin path lined with pine needles, wet rocks, and silence. No welcome sign, no trail marker, just that first step, the one where your heart shifts a little because now you're in it. At first, it's a woodland dream. Ferns arch over the path, mist clings to your sleeves, and the only sound is the drip, drip, drip from the trees above. Your skirts, heavy from the damp, drag against your legs, and your boots squelch slightly with every footfall. You keep walking. And then the real climb begins. The path is more a sequence of ledges now. Stone slabs polished slick by centuries of weather, and apparently the tears of people who thought this would be a breezy little nature walk. You scramble up boulders, grip tree roots for balance, and swear under your breath in the most ladylike way you can muster. Your gloves are mud-streaked, your bonnet long removed and tucked in your belt. Historians still argue whether Monadnock inspired Thoreau's wilder philosophies or if he simply climbed it on a good weather day and got lucky. Either way, this is no philosophical ramble. It's a sweaty uphill argument with gravity. You pause halfway up, not to rest, but to witness something impossible. The clouds part just slightly to reveal a valley below stitched with fields and rooftops, all softened in the mist. A patch of sun breaks through, landing on a single red barn like a spotlight. It's not the whole panorama, but it's enough. You reach the summit sooner than expected. Either you were faster than you thought, or time slowed out of pity. The rocks are slick, wind-carved and raw. There's no summit lodge, no safety railing, just open space and sky. A few hawks trace lazy spirals above, and somewhere below thunder grumbles far off, distant enough to enjoy, close enough to respect. And then the sun comes out. You turn slowly in place. The world, your world, is spread out like a patchwork of stories you haven't heard yet. Lakes shimmer in the distance. Roads thread through trees. You see villages you passed and places you've only guessed at. You see the path that brought you here, thin and winding, and you understand, maybe for the first time, how far you've come. There's a strange kind of quiet up here, not silence exactly. Wind moves, insects chirp, but a kind of pause in the world, like the mountain is holding its breath, waiting for you to say something wise or at least grateful. You manage a smile and pull your shawl tighter. There's a metal box at the summit, a little tin one, tucked into a crevice. Inside it you find folded bits of paper, signatures, scribbled poems, and a grocery list. You add your names, yours and your traveling companions', then fold the paper gently and return it to its place. You're part of the story now. The descent is harder, not more painful, but sobering. You slide more than you walk, your boots finding uncertain purchase on the same rocks that felt like triumph an hour ago. The sun disappears again, clouds creeping back in with the indifference of a stage crew cleaning up after the final act. At the tree line, you pause to take one last look back. The peak is hidden again, swallowed in fog, as if the mountain has no intention of being caught twice in the same mood. Back at the inn, the fireplace is already crackling. The innkeeper greets you with an expression halfway between amusement and alarm. "You made it," he says, pouring tea like it's a medal. You peel off your damp outer layer, stretch your legs, and feel the first delicious sting of returning circulation. That night, you eat supper slowly, every bite warm and earned. You write a few lines in your journal, illegibly probably, and fall asleep to the low hum of crickets and the distant rush of wind across the summit. You dream of stones beneath your feet and a sky that opens when it chooses. You dream of walking toward clouds instead of away from them. And you wake up different. You don't know it yet, but this moment, the climbing, the mist, the hush at the summit, will become the story people ask for. Not the miles or the maps, but this one day, this mountain, this proof that you can do more than anyone expected, especially yourself.
Tomorrow, the road pulls north again. The Shakers are waiting on a hill somewhere. Your horse will be ready. The trail will be dry, or not. But for now, you've stood in the sky, and it has not forgotten you. You leave Monadnock behind the next morning with an ache in your thighs and a grin that won't quite go away. Charlie's rested and ready, and you're sitting a little straighter in the phaeton because something shifts inside a person after standing on a mountaintop, even if your boots are still damp. The road carries you north again, through gentle hills brushed with mist, through early sunlight catching on spider webs between fence posts. It feels like the world has been rinsed clean. Your destination today is both strange and still, the Shaker village at Canterbury. You've heard of them, of course, quiet, devout, mysterious in their simplicity. You're not sure what to expect. More than once, you glance at your clothing and wonder if your hat's too flashy for their tastes. But then again, you've just climbed a rain-slick mountain in boots that smell like pond water. Modesty is relative. The miles pass in a gentle rhythm. You stop once at a roadside stand where a woman sells berries in tiny woven baskets. You buy two, not because you need them, but because the stand is beautiful in its effort. Little white cloth pinned to the awning, one bucket for change, and a single flower stuck in a jar. It feels like something the Shakers might approve of. Orderly, useful, and quietly lovely. You reach Canterbury by mid-afternoon. The village appears like a hymn you half remember, built from whitewashed buildings, wooden signs, and gardens arranged so precisely they look like embroidery. You drive slowly, out of instinct. No one tells you to. It just feels wrong to rush here. A man in a wide-brimmed hat nods at you from a porch. A woman in blue steps from the herb house to sweep the stoop. They don't stare, they don't wave you in, they simply exist around you in stillness. You're met by Brother George and Sister Felina, who welcome you not as guests, but as arrivals, like they've been expecting someone and you'll do just fine. Brother George takes Charlie's reins with the ease of a man who has cared for animals longer than most horses live. Sister Felina leads you inside. The guest quarters are simple. White curtains, hand-woven rugs, furniture without a single embellishment. You place your shawl over a chair and feel like you've just dropped a firework into a chapel. Everything in the room has purpose. No more, no less. You eat supper with the community in silence, or rather in the kind of silence that hums with soft clinks of wooden spoons and the rhythmic scrape of bread against plate. No one speaks, but the mood isn't cold. It's just different, restful, like the room itself is holding the conversation. Historians still argue whether the Shakers were visionaries ahead of their time or eccentrics locked into a belief system that could never survive modernity. But tonight, watching a dozen people move with absolute intention, no wasted motion, no pointless chatter, you start to understand the appeal. Life here is pared down to its bones, and somehow it still sings. After dinner, Sister Felina brings you a small bundle, a hand-sewn lunch for your travels tomorrow. Bread, dried apples, a folded note tucked in beside it. It says, "Don't forget to rest," in tidy handwriting. Not "stay safe" or "take care," just "don't forget to rest." You sleep that night without dreams, no mountains, no storms, no horses slipping on wet rock, just the solid weight of the handmade quilt and the distant sound of someone sweeping a hallway at dawn. Morning breaks with soft bells and dew on the grass. Charlie's already hitched and ready, looking more polished than you've ever seen him. You half suspect Brother George gave him a motivational speech before sunrise. You follow the road east this time, toward Alton Bay. The hills get steeper, the roads rougher, The silence of the Shaker village stays with you, though. You notice it now, in the wind, in the way birds pause before singing. 10 miles of climbing follows, the longest stretch you've done in one go. A woman on the road warns you that the path is lonely and no good, and you agree with both descriptions halfway through. It's a narrow, winding affair that snakes through pine and granite, with sharp descents and blind curves. Charlie starts to slow. You climb out and walk beside him, placing a hand on his neck, letting your footsteps match his. There's a strange satisfaction in it, this quiet trudge uphill. You're not conquering anything, not proving anything, just moving forward because that's what the day asks of you. Eventually, the trees part, and you glimpse Lake Winnipesaukee in the distance, still and endless, ringed by blue hills. You don't shout, you don't cheer, you just smile, grateful that your legs still work and that Charlie hasn't taken up smoking as a coping mechanism. Alton Bay is all bustle and brightness. It's a shock after Canterbury's hush. Here, boats crowd the docks, children yell from porches, and a brass band warms up down the street. You find an inn by the water's edge. The owner, an older woman with a laugh like a trumpet, shows you to your room and offers lemonade before you can even sit. You think briefly of the Shakers and how they'd probably twitch at the garish wallpaper. But you like the room anyway. It has a window view of the lake and a breeze that smells like pine and fried fish. Later, you take a small boat out alone. Just a rowboat, nothing fancy. You paddle past the docks and into the open water. The sun lowers. The lake glows amber. A loon calls across the stillness, and your hands rest on the oars, unmoving. You've crossed so many miles already, and still, the world keeps offering you more. A peaceful village, a hard climb, a bowl of soup and silence, a lake in golden light. Not epic, not famous, not the sort of thing people write textbooks about, but it's yours. And tomorrow, the road opens again.
The next morning begins with gulls. Not the romantic kind gliding through rosy dawn, but the screaming, overly confident ones that fight over breadcrumbs outside your window like they're reenacting a tiny sea battle. You sit up slowly, stretch sore arms, and let the noise fold into the hum of lake life. Alton Bay is already stirring, the thump of oars against dock posts, a dog barking 2 houses down, and the rhythmic whir of someone's clothesline pulley as clean sheets are flung into the breeze. You eat breakfast on the porch, eggs, toast, and a coffee so strong it might qualify as a building material. The innkeeper chats while she pours, telling you stories about the tourists from Boston who nearly sank a rowboat by overloading it with refreshments. You laugh politely, sip the bitter brew, and wonder if you finally crossed the line from traveler to local curiosity. By mid-morning, you're packed and ready, Charlie fed and brushed to gleaming by some mysterious force, probably the stable boy, though you half suspect Charlie just walked into the lake and rolled until clean. You steer northeast now, roughly toward Portsmouth, though roughly might be too generous a word. You're not tracing a direct line, you're meandering, by intent, by instinct, and occasionally by accident. The road slips away beneath you, winding through small towns with names that barely register, except for one memorable sign boasting Salisbury, home of the world's largest rutabaga, once. You don't ask. Some things are better left in mystery. You pull into Newburyport just as the afternoon light slants gold against the buildings. The town leans on its age with the casual ease of a retired actor, still charming, slightly theatrical, and aware that it once mattered a great deal more than it does now. Brick sidewalks, iron railings, Old houses with stories clawing at their windows. You stable Charlie and walk through the town like you've done it 100 times before. You pass Lord Timothy Dexter's mansion. Yes, the eccentric merchant who once declared himself Lord of Chester and filled his yard with statues of great men, including himself. One hand points toward the harbor, the other toward, well, no one agrees on what that statue's doing. Historians still argue whether Dexter was a brilliant satirist or just completely out of his depth and up to his neck in fortune. You stroll down Water Street, where Harriet Prescott Spofford once lived and wrote. You try to picture her at her desk, maybe squinting at the same curve of the river you see now. There's something grounding about walking the same streets as people who spun stories for a living, like you're borrowing their ghost for a little while. You take dinner at a small inn. The stew is thick, the bread fresh, and the candlelight flickers gently against the brass candlesticks like it's trying to make everything feel older. The waiter, an earnest young man who looks like he belongs in a painting about the American Revolution, tells you about an evening barge ride on the Merrimack. You agree immediately. And so, as dusk melts into darkness, you find yourself stepping into a long, low barge lit with lanterns and powered by a team of rowers who somehow manage to keep a rhythm despite one of them humming a tune that doesn't match the strokes. The river glides by in slow motion. Willow branches dip into the current like fingertips. Fireflies hover, blinking in and out of the air like they're being drawn by a nervous cartoonist. There's no destination, really. The ride is the point. You lean back, head against the wooden rail, and let the lanterns flicker over your boots while the water whispers under the hull. In that moment, the past and present fold together. The stars overhead are the same ones that watched over indigenous canoes, over fishing skiffs and colonial sloops, and packets of letters sent home with trembling fingers. Now they watch over you, a woman in a borrowed boat, half dreaming, half drifting. Back on shore, you walk quietly. The streets are quieter now, save for the uneven tap of your boots and the breeze pushing through the alleyways. You feel the weight of the miles in your bones, but it's the good kind of tired. The kind that comes from motion, from seeing, from not needing to explain your reasons to anyone, not even yourself. The next morning you press farther south, curious about the coastline. You follow roads that cling to the edge of Massachusetts like ivy, passing through Gloucester, Rye, Hampton, each with its own flavor. Gloucester gives you lobster pots and fishing tails. Rye offers salt marshes and suspiciously elegant goats. Hampton throws you a carnival before you're ready. You pass the edge of it, where the scent of fried dough and sea air collide in an aromatic war zone. Children scream on a spinning ride. Teenagers parade past in clothes designed more for admiration than function. And somewhere someone is selling mystic clams out of a painted cart. You don't stop, but you don't forget it either. By late afternoon, you've reached Salisbury Beach. You tie Charlie loosely outside a small clapboard cafe and walk the boardwalk barefoot. The tide's out, leaving long streaks of shell and seaweed in its wake. You crouch to pick up a perfectly intact sand dollar, then toss it back like it's a blessing someone else is supposed to find. There's a fringe theory you remember reading once, that certain coastal towns carry emotional imprints, like sea salt palimpsests. Emotions left by past visitors, washed in and out with the tide. Standing here now, you believe it. Something lingers in the air, nostalgia, longing, restlessness. Maybe that's what drives all this. The miles, the dust, the long dinners and longer silences. You're not searching for anything exact. You're just keeping company with motion. You sleep that night in a modest boarding house a few miles inland. The mattress is too soft.
the wallpaper slightly moldy, and the proprietor offers unsolicited thoughts about your lifestyle. But she also makes you tea and hands you a stack of clean towels with a smile that's real. In the dark, you lie still and think of the river, the way the lanterns swayed, the smell of the water, the ripple of history beneath every current. Tomorrow, maybe you'll go to Boston, or maybe not, because the road, after all, belongs to you.
You wake up to birdsong and the faint scent of mildew. The wallpaper is still peeling in delicate curls above your bed, and your boots are exactly where you left them, damp, slightly crooked, and undeniably heroic. You roll out of bed with the stiff grace of someone who has spent far too many days sitting upright in a moving vehicle built before the invention of suspension. One arm stretch, one low groan, one moment of quiet pride. You're still doing this. Your hostess, an opinionated woman with an aggressive fondness for toast, asks where you're headed next. You shrug. Maybe Boston, maybe not. She tuts, says it's dangerous for ladies to be traveling alone like this, and then hands you an extra apple wrapped in a cloth napkin. You'll need this more than I will, she mutters, as if affection itself is something she needs to deny. You leave before breakfast ends, your wheels clattering over the narrow bridge that marks the edge of town. You can already feel the humidity creeping into the day. Charlie seems unimpressed by the lack of clear direction, but obeys anyway. Steady, patient, and far more competent than either of you. South pulls at you, and so south you go. The towns get closer together now. Northborough, Franklin, Taunton. They come and go in a blur of storefronts, dusty roads, and the occasional perplexed postmaster wondering what to do with two women and a very polite horse. In Franklin, you pause for shade under a patch of hickory trees. A boy rides past on a bicycle so rusty it sounds like it's broadcasting static. He circles back, stares at your phaeton, and asks, "Are you running away?" You smile. "Maybe a little." He nods. Solemn. Cool. The road takes you farther south toward Tiverton and the coast. You pass stone walls laced with moss, orchards beginning to fatten with summer fruit, and the occasional white heron wading in roadside marshes like it's on vacation from a Japanese ink painting. Eventually, you reach Newport. And Newport, as always, arrives like a full-volume opera after a week of lullabies. It sparkles, it chatters, it pretends not to notice you, which is how you know it's noticed you completely. Grand houses loom behind manicured hedges. People stroll with parasols like they're attending rehearsals for a Gilded Age costume drama. Horses wear polished tack that probably costs more than your phaeton. You feel dusty, and also completely satisfied. You stable Charlie in the outskirts, where the innkeeper's daughter agrees to feed him extra if you tell her just one story about what it's like to sleep in a storm. You oblige, telling a half-true tale involving thunder, an overturned lantern, and a mysterious shape in the woods that was probably just a goat. She listens wide-eyed, then promptly disappears to feed him everything in the pantry. You spend 2 days in Newport, resting your back, oiling the wheels, and pretending not to stare at women in gowns you'll never own. Historians still argue whether Newport's golden reputation was more illusion than substance, a performance of wealth rather than the real thing. But walking its streets, you can't deny that whatever it was, it left behind one heck of a set piece. On the second day, you board a small boat to Martha's Vineyard. You leave Charlie behind again, this time with 2 extra apples and a skeptical glance. "Don't let her tell you stories," you whisper. He flicks his ears, unimpressed. The boat to the island is crowded with families, basket lunches, and enough sun hats to shade a small town. You sit near the back, watching the shoreline recede like a fading sketch, the waves splitting under the prow with hypnotic regularity. You land at Oak Bluffs and step into a town that feels painted. Bright cottages, winding streets, people who wave at strangers like it's required by law. A woman in a striped skirt directs you toward Cottage City,
and soon you're walking among gingerbread-trimmed homes that look like they were built by fairy tale architects on a sugar high. You rent a room from a widow named Mrs. Carver, who insists you call her Addie, and who bakes a peach cobbler so intense it temporarily resets your entire nervous system. You spend the evening wandering the narrow lanes, watching the sky turn lavender above the tiny spires and curved porches. A small band plays near the green. You sit on a bench with your shoes off, your skirts pulled just high enough to cool your ankles. A little girl approaches you and offers you a daisy. She says you look tired, but happy. You thank her. You are. Back in your room, you sleep with the windows open, the curtains breathing gently in and out. Somewhere outside, a foghorn groans in the distance. Inside, the quilt is scratchy, the pillow too firm, and yet you fall into sleep like it's been waiting for you all day. The next morning, you catch the early boat back to the mainland. Charlie greets you with a sideways glance that says, "You've been gallivanting again." You brush his coat and pretend to explain why Cottage City doesn't actually mean cottages own the land. He seems unconvinced. You move north again, following the coast. Plymouth appears on the horizon like a promise of historical obligation. You can't skip it. No one skips Plymouth. You arrive mid-afternoon and immediately seek out the famous Rock. It's smaller than expected. Dwarfed by its own protective railing, it sits in the middle of a carefully designed monument that feels like someone trying very hard to make it feel important. You stare at it for a long minute. It's not the rock's fault, you decide. No one chooses what they get remembered for. You stroll through the town, visiting the spots you're supposed to. The Mayflower replica, the burial hill, the museum where a docent explains the dietary differences between pilgrims and Puritans with the dry enthusiasm of a man who's eaten both in spirit. You sleep that night in a room above a bakery, the scent of rising dough curling into your dreams. The creaks creak with every breath, but you're used to strange beds now. You've slept through thunder, through goats, through small-town harmonica practice. This is practically luxury. You dream of your own rock, not something others gather to admire, just a smooth stone beside a quiet stream, where your horse rests, your shawl hangs, and your name is carved not for glory, but to mark that you were here, that you saw, that you moved through this wide, unpredictable world and left something behind, even if it was just hoofprints. Tomorrow, you'll ride to Bunker Hill. Because of course you will.
You leave Plymouth with just enough flour dust on your sleeves to look like you've had a proper colonial encounter. The road is warm already, sun climbing early, ambitious. You tighten your shawl not for warmth, but to keep the breeze from snatching it as you ascend toward Boston, following a thread of coastal towns and memories, each one stitched with stories you haven't heard yet. At first, the path curves gently, hugging the shoreline. Marshes to your left, salt-crusted fences to your right. You pass through Marshfield, where the scent of tide water and freshly split wood fills the morning. People here move slowly. Boats tilt in dry docks like half-assembled thoughts. You stop briefly to let Charlie drink from a trough near a weather-beaten store, and an old man in a chair, wide-brimmed hat, pipe at rest on his chest, asks if you've seen Daniel Webster's fields. You blink. No, you didn't know they were here. He smiles like a magician and waves vaguely behind him. You thank him, but Charlie is already restless, stamping to move. So you roll on, letting history slip behind without ceremony. Hingham greets you with white fences and blue hydrangeas, a town so old it wears its years like embroidery. You stop again, mostly because you feel like you should. This is where you realize something odd. After miles of strange towns, unfamiliar kitchens, and one particularly haunted-looking outhouse, you've become less interested in what you're supposed to see and more drawn to whatever unfolds naturally. Still, the blue hills shimmer on the horizon, and you pause at their base to eat a hand pie from your lunch basket and imagine what these ridges have seen: indigenous hunters, colonial scouts, Civil War deserters,
100 local lovers sneaking kisses behind junipers. Historians still argue whether some of these inland ridgelines were used as seasonal trade lookouts or simply natural defense posts. You wonder if it matters. Either way, the view is good and the wind up here feels old. You don't linger. You rarely do. Soon, Milton rolls past in a blur of taverns and tidy porches, and Boston begins to breathe louder on the horizon. The roads become denser. People walk with destination in their feet. You feel yourself tighten a little, like you've stepped into a stage play mid-scene and no one told you the script. You reach Point Shirley near midday. It's breezy, windswept, almost reluctant to admit it belongs to the city. There's something forlorn here, an edge-of-the-world kind of feeling. You pause on the shoreline, watch the water wrestle itself into froth, and suddenly, despite the bustle in the distance, you feel alone in the best possible way. One of those rare, glorious kinds of solitude where the world isn't shutting you out, it's giving you space. The tide is out. You walk a little further, just to see if it changes anything. It doesn't, but you do. Eventually, Boston surrounds you. It's a strange thing entering a city by carriage, an old one no less, when everyone else is moving by rail or boot leather. You clatter into the noise, feeling oddly regal and slightly ridiculous. People stare. You nod like this was your plan all along. The Bunker Hill Monument appears ahead, its shape familiar before you recognize it. You steady Charlie and tie him loosely near a shaded post. The monument rises like a stubborn finger, gray and absolute. You stare up, neck craned. It looks different than you imagined, not just taller, but heavier somehow, like it remembers things you don't. You climb. No guide, no fanfare, just stone steps that spiral upward with an unforgiving rhythm, around and around. Your boots echo against the walls and your breath turns to steam in the narrow, dim stairwell. You wonder, not for the first time, why humans are so obsessed with going higher. At the top, light floods in, and there's the city. Red brick rooftops, masts crowding the harbor, streetcars moving like ants. Boston stretches in every direction, arrogant and magnificent. You lean against the railing, trying to match what you're seeing with all the diagrams in your childhood textbooks. You can't. The world looks different when you've earned your way to the top. There's a plaque near the viewing slit telling you that William Prescott supposedly said, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." Historians still argue whether that was ever actually spoken or simply attributed to him later as convenient drama. You look out again. Try to imagine rows of men in red, smoke curling across Charleston, cannon fire echoing off the harbor. But there's just a breeze now. You descend slowly, knees clicking like old latches. Back on the ground, you find Charlie napping with his head low, eyes half-lidded. A group of school children are pointing at him excitedly, arguing whether he's a warhorse. You don't correct them. That night, you stay in Cambridge. The boarding house is bookish, quiet halls, dusty windows, the faint perfume of old paper. Your room has a bookshelf, and inside you find a forgotten copy of Longfellow's Tales of a Wayside Inn. You flip it open. A pressed flower falls out. A violet, I think, though it's gone pale from years between pages. You make tea on the little stove in the hallway. An older woman sits in the shared parlor, knitting and humming softly. She doesn't look up when you enter, but after a while she says, "Long day?" You nod. Worth it? You think of the stairwell, of the tide at Point Shirley, of the little boy who asked if you were running away. You nod again. Outside, Boston doesn't sleep. It exhales. Streetlights flicker. Footsteps tap the sidewalk in counter rhythm to the faint whir of trolleys. Somewhere nearby, someone plays a violin slightly off key. It doesn't matter. You fall asleep with your hand resting lightly on Longfellow's open book, dreaming not of battles or monuments or famous last words, but of water against stone, of slow rides, of the quiet dignity of motion.
You leave Cambridge early. The sun is still smoothing itself out across the sky, barely awake. Charlie's ears twitch as you pack your basket, and your boots echo softly across cobbled stones that remember more than they reveal. Harvard Square yawns in the distance, bookstores not yet open, ivy climbing, old brick like it's late for something. You tip your hat to no one in particular, and the road, once again, folds out in front of you. You head north this time, counter to the current, tracing a new arc toward the White Mountains. The plan? Franconia Notch, or something like it. The reality? Whatever the road decides. You're chasing a place people describe in half-wistful, half-awful terms. A notch, after all, sounds modest, like a nick in the landscape, but everyone speaks of it as if it's a hymn disguised as geography. You pass through Lowell, where the textile mills still hum faintly in the air like a ghost of industry. Red brick, long windows, and canal waters that don't reflect so much as remember. Historians still argue whether Lowell was a triumph of female labor empowerment or a polite kind of exploitation. You wonder if the answer is yes to both. In any case, you tip your bonnet to the spirit of the mill girls, whose names didn't always make it into the books, but whose fingerprints are in every stitch of your travel shawl. Farther along, you enter New Hampshire. The signs change, the trees get bossier, roads feel less interested in your comfort and more devoted to their own moods. You stop at a general store for oats and a tin of lemon candies, and a freckled clerk asks where you're headed. When you say Franconia, he whistles low and says, "Hope you've got strong wheels." You do, mostly. You pass Canterbury and take a side trip to the old Shaker village. The simplicity of it arrests you. White fences, straight lines, silence thick enough to taste. A woman in gray explains the layout to you. Communal spaces, work sheds, living quarters. You nod, then wander a bit, surprised by how spiritual Quietwood can feel. It's the kind of place where you could probably hear your own regret if you stayed too long. You leave before lunch. By afternoon, the weather changes. Clouds stumble in from the west, lazy but thick. You tie your bonnet tighter, tuck your sketchbook deeper into the phaeton, and press onward. The land ripples now, no longer flat, no longer polite. Trees close in, streams chatter more urgently by the road. It smells like moss and determination. Somewhere near Littleton, you meet another carriage. This is rare. You pull to the side, and the other driver, a man in a long coat and an expression that suggests he's been arguing with the wind for several years, nods and says, "You'll want to stop for the meeting." Meeting? Turns out you've stumbled upon a country church gathering already in progress just beyond a bend. 100 or more people, most on foot, some on wheels, circled under a wide sky, hymnals in hand. A pastor with a beard like a grandfather clock is mid-sermon, gesturing broadly while a baby cries somewhere in the second row. You don't usually stop for these things, but today you feel like you're being invited. So you tether Charlie to a tree, smooth your skirts, and sit on a bench that groans under your weight like it has strong opinions. You stay through the sermon, the singing, the passing of lemonade and chipped mason jars. No one asks your name. And that's the best part. You exist as part of the moment. No explanation required. Someone brings you a ginger cookie. You don't ask where it came from. You just eat it. And it tastes like every good thing that ever came from a country kitchen. Afterwards, you ride on. The road gets harder now, narrower. The kind that curls around rock faces like it's whispering secrets. You feel every bump in your spine. Charlie snorts with occasional irritation, and you can't blame him. But the scenery makes up for it. Franconia Notch approaches like a slow intake of breath. First, the trees draw back. Then the air sharpens, crisp, piney, edged in mystery. The mountains don't rise so much as emerge. They're not theatrical. They're ancient, the kind of presence that doesn't need to shout. You camp that night at the mouth of the notch, not in a tent, you don't carry one, but in a half-sheltered nook near a small stream.
You spread a blanket, set your lantern on a flat stone, and let the sounds of rushing water and sighing trees lull you into something like a dream. There's a chill here, not the biting kind, the kind that reminds you you're alive. You fall asleep curled in your coat, one hand resting lightly on the lantern handle, the other on your sketchbook. Somewhere nearby, Charlie shifts in his sleep and blows out a long breath that sounds almost like a laugh. Morning breaks with mist. And birdsong unlike anything you've heard so far. Sharper, clearer, like the forest is tuning itself for something important. You pack slowly, reverently. Even brushing your boots feels like an intrusion. Then, into the notch. The road narrows further, flanked by great rock faces that seem close enough to touch. You don't talk. You barely think. You just drive, letting the world shrink to wheels, hooves, and silence. It's not dramatic. It's sacred. At the very center, you stop. Just for a moment, you tie Charlie and walk 20 paces to a clearing. There's a boulder here, worn smooth by time and by hands you'll never know. You place your palm on it. You don't need to speak. Somewhere high above, a hawk cries. Then the wind answers. And you ride on. The road unwinding again, the notch behind you, but not gone. Never gone. You'll carry it for the next 1,000 miles.
The road spits you out of Franconian Notch like a cherry pit. One moment, you're enveloped by granite guardians and mossy hush. The next, bam, you're blinking into open sky, unsure whether you've just crossed a threshold or been ejected by nature's front gate. Behind you, stone, silence, sacred wind. Ahead, clouds, questions, and Mount Adams rising like a divine provocation. You've been hearing about Mount Adams since Vermont. Seasoned travelers with pine needles in their beards mention it like an unspoken rite. Cracked leather guidebooks warn of sudden storms and invisible trails. Grocers with sticky counters lower their voices when they say, "She's a hard climb, that one." They say the summit view hushes even the most talkative. They also say hikers have frozen solid in July. Naturally, you head straight for it. The approach isn't kind. The road doesn't meander. It insists. Gravel sharpens. The slope gets gutsy. Trees lean in like they're gossiping about your odds. Charlie, for his part, trudges up with mild resignation, flicking his tail at flies and probably your ambition. You glance at him after one rough patch and swear he rolls his eyes at a passing cow. "Look what I deal with," he seems to say. As you rise into New Hampshire's spine, the temperature begins to drop in quiet defiance of summer's calendar. You tug your shawl tighter, not because it helps, but because dignity must remain intact. You stop in a village so small the post office shares space with a bait shop and a barber's chair. 3 houses, 1 sawmill, a rusted bell on a post. A woman sells dried apples from a wheelbarrow with the casual menace of someone who has seen the mountain eat better prepared folks. You buy 2 slices, 1 for now, 1 for luck. She points east. She says, "The goat's path is faster, but it bites." You nod like someone who's never been bitten in their life and leave before she can reconsider giving directions. The next morning, you rise early, real early, still dark sky early. You leave Charlie at the base with a kind-eyed stable boy who promises oats and tells you in earnest tones, "Bring back your bones, lady." You're under-equipped by any modern standard. A torn map, a flask of lukewarm tea, a journal, some bread, and that now slightly sweaty apple slice. No walking stick, no guide, and absolutely no sense of proportion. Still, you begin. The trailhead is shy. It hides behind pine scrub and half-fallen signs. The first mile is gentle, trail wide, rocks courteous, breeze flirtatious.
You let your mind wander. You compose a mental letter to your cousin Louise about how some people are born for silk sheets, but you clearly belong to granite. But then the trees thin. The air sharpens like a blade. The sky expands into something that looks suspiciously like judgment. And the trail, it forgets it's a trail. You're now climbing, not walking, scrambling. The boulders are haphazard, stacked like a toddler's idea of stairs. You haul yourself upward by sheer indignation. Your boots lose traction. Your palms earn their first scrapes. The wind picks up and begins muttering things you're glad you can't quite translate. At one point, you pause on a ledge no wider than a bookshelf. You pant. You curse quietly. And then, in an act of complete absurdity, you take out your journal and draw a crude little stick figure mountain and write, "Currently being eaten alive by a scenic postcard." Historians still argue whether this trail, the notorious airline route, was originally forged by surveyors or sheep. Some claim it never meant for humans at all. You believe it. You can hear the mountain laughing beneath your feet. Then come the clouds, not drifting, charging, fog so thick it feels personal. Your hand disappears if you stretch it. You keep going, not from courage, but because it's the only way you'll ever leave. The ground is slick, the air turns wet, and still you climb. One more ridge, one more crawl, one final grip of your aching thighs and cursed pride, and suddenly, light. You're at the top. The clouds part briefly, just enough, and what lies below steals your breath harder than the climb ever could. Forests swell, stretch out like green oceans, hills ripple like old quilts, tiny towns glitter in the distance like secrets. You swear you can see time from up here, not just space. Every step you've taken, every conversation you've overheard in dusty stores, every pine-scented breeze, they all belong to this moment now. You are not above the world. You're just in a place that lets you see it differently. For 5 minutes, you don't speak, not even in your head. You just listen to the wind combing the stones and your heartbeat in your ears. You sit on a lichen-covered rock and bite into the dried apple. It's tart, sharp, real. Then the clouds close in again, colder this time. You shiver, you stand, and you begin the descent. Gravity is eagerer than you. It drags you down faster than grace allows. Your boots skid. You slip twice. One slide leaves your coat torn and your right palm bloodied. You mutter apologies to no one. You keep moving because what choice do you have? You reach the base just as dusk paints the forest edges in gold. Charlie is unimpressed. He snorts at your muddy hem and licks your coat pocket until you give him the last crumb of bread. The stable boy grins as you limp back. Well? You nod. Colder than it looks. He nods back, like you've joined an unspoken club. You spend the night in a rambling farmhouse that smells of birchwood and beeswax. The innkeeper, a quiet widow with a thick braid and excellent soup, gives you a room with a view of the stars. You soak your feet. You watch the sky. You write only one thing in your journal before sleep takes you. Mount Adams doesn't shout. It listens. And it makes you do the same.
The next morning, you wake with bruises you don't remember earning. Your arms hum with effort. Your knees mutter complaints. But your spirit, it practically skips out of bed. There's something about conquering a mountain that makes you feel like you could rewrite laws, geological, physical, or even municipal ones. You step outside and breathe the cleanest air you've ever known, like the sky's been freshly washed and hung to dry. Charlie is rested and smug, no doubt pleased you finally realize wheels are smarter than boots. You give him a dried apple in thanks, and he accepts it like a diplomat, graciously tolerating your nonsense. You saddle up and roll east, legs sore, heart light. The road to Maine isn't a road so much as a shifting compromise between gravel, forest, and suggestion. You cross into the state by accident, noticing only when a postmaster in a dusty little town mentions you're the first lady traveler he's seen since spring thaw. You nod, like that was your intention all along. Truth is, you've been following instinct more than direction. But instinct, it seems, favors pine and sea air. Soon, the scent of salt starts to tinge the breeze. You see gulls arguing over something in a field. The light begins to change, not brighter, just wetter, more reflective, as if the sky is thinking about the ocean even before you see it. You pass through Bidford, then Kennebuckport, names that sound too pretty to be real, and yet here they are, full of shingled roofs, tidy porches, and suspiciously well-behaved children. You stop to sketch a lighthouse perched on a cliff like a ship that forgot how to move. A fisherman with a face like driftwood nods at you and says, "She still works, though no one trusts her lamp." You're not sure if he means the lighthouse or something else entirely. Historians still argue whether the old lighthouses of Maine prevented more shipwrecks than they caused. Some swear the early fog bell system saved hundreds. Others insist many a captain steered toward disaster, mistaking the bell's echo for safety. Either way, the romance of them remains. Lonely towers, guardians of the surf, glowing through storms like stubborn prayers. You ride the coast slowly, letting each bend in the shoreline surprise you. There's a rhythm here, like waves, even on land. A rise, a pause, a crest of wind, then the hush of trees or fields or distant thunder. You stop for lunch beneath a crooked pine whose branches seem to point home. You wonder, briefly, if you're still traveling, or if this has simply become the way you live now. Somewhere near Booth Bay, the fog rolls in thick. It's the kind that arrives with posture, shoulders hunched, fingers creeping. Visibility drops to 5 feet, and you feel like you've been scooped out of the world and placed inside someone else's breath. Charlie, thankfully, knows better than you. He snorts once and keeps walking, hooves clicking like a pocket watch. You trust him because you have to, also because he hasn't tried to kill you yet. You stop at a weathered inn along the water. No name out front, just a carving of a ship on the door and a brass handle that turns with a sigh. Inside, a fire crackles, and the innkeeper greets you with that particular blend of coastal hospitality and faint distrust. You give her your name, she gives you a room key, a bowl of chowder, and no further questions. Upstairs, the room leans slightly to the left. The bed is stuffed with something between feathers and seaweed. The window looks out onto nothing but white, though you can hear waves muttering nearby like tired old men. You fall asleep to that sound, sea against rock, over and over, not trying to break it, just reminding it who's boss. The next day, the fog is gone. The world returns bright and blue and unapologetically wet. You decide to take a boat. The harbor master laughs when you ask, "In that dress?" You nod, smiling. It's been worse places. He shrugs and offers a ride on a mail launch heading to an island a few miles out. The boat is narrow, wooden, charmingly damp. You climb aboard, tuck your skirts under you, and try not to think about your non-existent swimming skills. The ride is brisk, wind in your face, salt on your lips. The island rises like a question mark, rocky, pine-covered, home to 5 houses, a dock, and one exceptionally territorial seagull. You wander a bit, picking up smooth stones and thoughts you didn't know you had. There's a kind of hush here you haven't felt even in the Notch. The quiet isn't lonely. It's generous. Back on the mainland, you stay one more night in the leaning room. The sea is louder now, a storm off somewhere. You write a few lines in your journal. There is an ache in the ocean, but it soothes more than it stings. You're no poet, but it feels true. You wake to sunlight and a decision. It's time to turn inland again. to dip into the dark green belly of Maine and trace the river roads that wander westward. The ocean gave you clarity. Now the forest will give you mystery. Before you leave, the innkeeper stops you at the door. Going far? You smile. Further than I look. She nods, then hands you a small shell. For luck, she says, but her tone suggests it's more of a warning. You tuck it into your coat pocket next to a crumpled apple wrapper, a stray button, and 10,000 miles worth of memory. Charlie whinnies softly. The wheels turn, and you vanish back into the trees.
The Kennebec River moves beside you like an old friend with secrets. Sometimes it glints in the sun, all charm and ripple. Sometimes it broods beneath fog, whispering of ice and ancient traders. Either way, it's never far, threading its way north as if showing you how to do the same. You follow its lead, through towns that blink sleepily at your passing, past timber bridges and half-empty general stores with "Yes, we're open" signs that feel more like suggestions. You've been on the road long enough now that time feels different. You don't count days by dates anymore. You count them by texture. The day with the muddy wheel. The day I dried socks on the buggy roof. The day Charlie wouldn't stop sneezing. Maine in early fall brings a new texture entirely. Crisp air that tastes like apples and wood smoke, trees turning loud with red and orange like they're showing off before winter steals their stage. One afternoon, you stop to rest in a meadow flecked with goldenrod. Charlie grazes nearby, his tail flicking with rhythmic satisfaction. You lie back, staring at clouds that resemble ships and teacups, and at least one suspiciously angry duck. You jot in your journal, "Somewhere between York and Canada, I stopped needing to get somewhere." Historians still argue whether Benedict Arnold's 1775 march through Maine was bold or foolish. He led over 1,000 men up the Kennebec in bateaux, wooden boats that were heavy even before being packed with supplies, and tried to surprise Quebec. They nearly froze, starved, lost countless provisions to rapids and rot. You pass one of their old campsites, now just a plaque and a bench overlooking the river. You wonder if any of those soldiers stared up at the same sky, asking what on earth they were doing. You spend the night in a logging town called Bingham. At the end, a wide woman with kind hands and a loud laugh serves you smoked trout and a story about the time the Kennebec flooded so bad her hens floated away on the woodpile. They came back, she says, eventually. You sip cider by the fire, marveling at how quickly strangers open up when you arrive in a buggy instead of a train. The next morning, you climb higher into the Maine Highlands. The road twists like a lazy snake. You pass stone walls swallowed by moss and wooden churches with steeples so tall they look like they're trying to poke heaven. Each town is quieter than the last. More trees, fewer people. You see more moose than men. Somewhere near Jackman, a man in a plaid coat offers you a shortcut. Cuts 5 miles, he says, but the bridge is out. You thank him and take the long way. You've earned the scenic route. That night, camped in a clearing that smells of pine and promise, you try to light a fire using matches that seem to resent you personally. Eventually, the flame catches. You warm your fingers, then your feet. You share a piece of bread with Charlie, who chews thoughtfully and stares at the stars like they owe him something. You sleep under a canvas tarp, the sky wide and forgiving. An owl calls, a coyote answers. You wrap yourself tighter and feel strangely safe. The next morning, you cross into Canada. There's no great ceremony, no border patrol with suspicious eyes, just a faded sign and a change in the road's accent. The trees look the same, but somehow the light feels different,
more silver than gold, the kind that makes you nostalgic for something that hasn't happened yet. You roll into the village of St. George and immediately fall in love with a bakery that smells like sugar and warm intentions. The baker insists you try the maple pie. You do. Twice. You buy a second slice for later and wrap it like treasure. He asks about your journey, then offers directions you don't quite understand, but nod politely at anyway. The French comes fast and soft here. You catch words, shapes of phrases, but mostly you understand through smiles and gestures. One woman asks to pet Charlie and whispers, "Il est beau," while stroking his neck. He behaves like royalty. You spend the night in a guest room above a bookshop. The walls are lined with titles in French, English, and a few you suspect are just for show. The owner gives you tea and a stack of old travel journals. You flip through them until the words blur and the smell of ink and dust lulls you to sleep. Canada welcomes you like a dream you didn't know you were having. The roads are quieter, the sky bigger, the pace somehow slower. You pass fields of wheat and barns painted the color of ripe strawberries. You wave at farmers. Some wave back. Some just tip their hats like they've seen your kind before. You make it to Quebec City in the late afternoon, the sun turning the Stein buildings into honey. Cobblestone streets rattle your wheels and bones. Everything here feels old but alive, like the walls remember songs and revolutions and heartbreaks in equal measure. You park Charlie in the shadow of a church so tall it leans into the clouds and whisper, "We made it." You wander, past fountains and markets and staircases that clearly hate tired feet. You eat poutine from a paper tray sitting on a bench overlooking the St. Lawrence River. It glows under the setting sun, wide and wise. You sigh, not from exhaustion, but from awe. That night, in a narrow room with lace curtains and a window cracked just enough to hear the wind, you journal one last line before sleep. Every mile north has taken me closer, not to a place, but to a stillness. Charlie snorts from the street below, dreaming of oats.
You rise early with the kind of quiet that only comes from sleeping beside water. The window pane holds a soft layer of fog, as if the outside world hasn't quite decided to wake up. The lake is still. The trees surrounding it are painted in solemn morning tones, gray, green, and the gentlest gold. Charlie is outside, tethered to a birch post, dozing as if he too has fallen under the lake's spell. You pack slowly, not because you're tired, but because part of you already dreads leaving. You've stayed longer than expected. 2 nights? 3? You stopped counting after the second evening canoe ride and the mug of cider that felt more like a bedtime story than a beverage. Lake Willoughby has that effect on people. When you finally set off, you follow the shoreline west, letting the road meander like an afterthought carved between water and rock. You pass a fisherman sitting motionless on a stump, a pipe in his mouth, line resting slack in the water. He doesn't nod or wave. He just exists, part of the landscape like the boulders or pines. You ask yourself what it is about this lake that makes people so quiet. Maybe it's the sheer size, or its impossible depth, rumored to plunge over 300 feet in places, darker than memory. Maybe it's the way the surrounding mountains seem to lean in, like they're guarding a sacred thing they once knew by name but now only remember in dreams. Historians still argue whether the lake was formed by glacial retreat or catastrophic tectonic activity. The geological consensus favors glaciers, but local legend prefers drama. One tale says 2 ancient lovers once ruled the mountains, until jealousy split them with a thunderclap, carving the lake between them. They say Mount Pisgah and Mount Hor still lean toward each other, aching to reconcile. The legend doesn't feel so ridiculous when you're here. You stop at a high overlook,
letting Charlie graze while you sit on a rock that seems made for such moments. You eat a lunch of apples and rye biscuits, scribbling notes in your journal between bites. The lake below is motionless. 2 loons glide without speaking. Across the water, Pisgah glows faintly orange in the sunlight, Hor slightly grayer, like he's grown tired from watching. Later that day, you pass through a forest of sugar maples, so radiant it feels like walking through a stained glass chapel. The road narrows, the hills close in. For a few miles, the world becomes a tunnel of light, the crunch of leaves under your wheels the only sound. You forget you're in Vermont. You could be anywhere or nowhere, and it would feel just as holy. You stop at a small general store where the proprietor wears 3 sweaters and sells nothing but local honey, flypaper, and sardines. He tells you the road to Brownington is washed out, but if you swing down past Barton and double back, you'll hit smooth gravel and a view worth the detour. You thank him, buy honey, and ignore the sardines. That detour takes you through farmlands so wide and quiet, they make your thoughts louder. You pass barns in various states of collapse, their red paint peeled by years of wind and indifference. Children wave from hay bales, dogs bark once, then fall asleep again. You see someone hang laundry in the golden light, sheets flapping like ghosts with good manners. You start to think of the road not as something you travel, but something you belong to. Like a string you've tied to the hem of your coat, trailing behind you, marking everywhere you've been. It connects the ocean, the mountains, the inns, the names you've forgotten, and the pies you never will. In Westmore, you stop again. You're told there's a trailhead that climbs halfway up Mount Hor. Not the summit, but enough for a view. You tie Charlie to a post, pack water, and hike. The trail is steep, but patient. It winds through ferns and moss and the kind of undergrowth that smells faintly of old books and new rain. At the overlook, the lake stretches below like a secret revealed. You see the road you traveled 3 mornings ago. You see the shoreline curve like an arm pulling the water close. You sit for a long time, shoes off, toes in the dirt, back against a tree that's probably older than Vermont's statehood. You don't take a photo. You don't need to. The view isn't for remembering, it's for being. On your way down, you think about everything this journey has shown you that no itinerary could have promised. The woman who gave you a pie with no charge because you looked homesick. The child in Canada who offered you a dandelion and told you it was magic. The evening you sang, "Come Thou Fount," to a sky so wide it swallowed your voice. You reach the buggy, untie Charlie, and ride on. The wind shifts. You pull your scarf tighter and glance back. The lake is behind you now, but not gone. You carry it in your coat, in your spine, in the journal pages now stained with butter and leaf prints and some kind of jam you still can't identify. That night, you camp beside a smaller, quieter pond. No name, no cabins, just frogs and stars, and the faint gurgle of something moving underground. You lie back, hands behind your head, and smile. Lake Willoughby may have been the cathedral, but this is the whisper that comes after the benediction.
Morning arrives in layers, mist, birdsong, and the rustle of Charlie shaking off dew. The unnamed pond lies quiet as ever, glassy and still, reflecting only trees and a pale blue sky smeared with clouds like smudged chalk. You stretch under your blanket, bones a bit stiffer than they used to be, but spirit as restless as ever. Vermont, it seems, is made of roads that don't end so much as wander into the next idea. You break camp slowly. No need to rush. You feed Charlie, brush his mane, tighten the harness. Then you mount the buggy and roll back onto the dirt path, letting the wheels creak a little louder than usual. There's something comforting in that sound now, like an old friend clearing their throat before a story. Today's goal? The Connecticut River Valley. You've been told it's beautiful this time of year, ripe with apples, wrapped in fog, and scattered with barns that look like Norman Rockwell sketches come to life. But as with most things on this journey, the goal matters less than the getting there. You pass through Burke, a town where every mailbox seems to have a flag waving and a pumpkin grinning. In the village square, a girl sells jars of apple butter on a folding table. You buy one, mostly because she looks shocked anyone stopped. She asks where you're going. You shrug. South-ish. She nods solemnly, like that's the only correct answer. The road curves through hills that rise and fall like breath. Each crest delivers a view better than the last. Valleys full of farms stitched together with stone walls. Scarecrows guarding rows of corn like awkward sentinels. Smoke curls from chimneys. Sheep dot pastures. It feels like you've wandered into a children's storybook that smells faintly of cinnamon. Historians still argue whether the Connecticut River was more vital to the birth of New England than the sea itself. Trade routes, settlements, and skirmishes all clustered around this winding spine of water. French trappers, English farmers, native nations, each left a mark, a name, a legend. One bend in the river was supposedly cursed by a sachem whose burial ground was disturbed. Another is said to sing on foggy mornings if you listen just right. You hear no singing, but the fog does something strange as you approach the valley. It dances. A ribbon of mist curls across the road like it's performing just for you. Charlie snorts, but doesn't stop. The trees close in again, tall pines that drip water from their needles, as if trying to remember rain. You breathe deep. The air smells of sap and moss and maybe, just maybe, a ghost or two. You stop in St. Johnsbury for supplies. Dried apples, oats, another pencil. At the general store, an elderly man with a mustache like a broom insists on seeing your buggy. He says, "I used to ride," he says, voice cracked but proud. "Took my girl across 3 counties once just to see a preacher with a fiddle." You don't ask what happened. His eyes already tell you it was worth it. Outside, a teenager stares at Charlie. "You doing this for a school project?" he asks. You grin. "Something like that." He nods, unimpressed. "Cool," he mutters, before skateboarding away. From there, the land begins to shift, less wild, more cultivated, more fences, more orchards. You spot a deer and 2 fawns watching you from a thicket, completely still. You don't speak, just nod and pass, as if you've interrupted something sacred. Near Barnett, the road hugs the river, and you feel its presence before you see it. Wide, slow, silver like melted coin under the sun. You pull over and walk to the edge. The Connecticut River stretches out before you, calm and constant. A freight train rumbles in the distance, barely louder than the birds. You sit for a while on a sun-warmed boulder, journal open in your lap, pen in your hand, but you don't write. Sometimes presence is enough. Later that day, you pass a field of wild geese, hundreds of them, fat and noisy and completely uninterested in your passing. Charlie's ears twitch at the honking. You both laugh. Yes, even him. You swear his eyes roll as they strut around like they own the place. You stop that evening in a small riverside inn just south of Bradford. The hostess is a grandmotherly woman who bakes by instinct and talks to her cat like it's the mayor. She puts you in the sunflower room, where the wallpaper peels gently at the corners and the bed creaks with a friendly groan. Over dinner, meatloaf, potatoes,
and something green that pretends not to be cabbage. She asks how far you've come. You begin to list states, but halfway through, she stops you with a hand on your arm. "Never mind where you've been," she smiles. "Where's your heart now?" You stare at your plate a moment longer than necessary. Then you say, softly, "Somewhere between the mountains and the river." She nods, satisfied. That night, you sit on the porch with a blanket around your shoulders and a mug of something hot. The river murmurs nearby, the stars blink patiently. You can't remember the last time your ears weren't full of engines or clocks or urgent voices. You write one sentence in your journal. "If I stopped here, I think I'd still feel I'd arrived." Then you close the book. Charlie nickers from his stable. The porch light flickers once and holds steady. And somewhere in the distance, the river flows on, carrying leaves, legends, and the soft memory of a traveler who chose the long way home.
Morning in the valley doesn't rush you. It simply arrives, gently, like a friend you've known your whole life. Light seeps in through the cracks of the barn siding, touching your blanket in soft gold. A rooster announces himself somewhere in the distance, proud and off-key. You stretch under your quilt, feel the cool air brushing your cheeks, and take in the sweet scent of hay, lavender, and whatever warmth lingered from the evening stew. The cat is back, curled tightly in the crook of your knees. You wonder when exactly it appointed itself guardian of your sleep. You let it be. Downstairs, the kitchen is already warm. The wiry couple greets you with sleepy smiles. She's humming as she flips flannel cakes. "Real ones," she clarifies with mock sternness. He grinds coffee by hand, rhythmically, like starting a song. You sit at the rough-hewn table, wooden spoon in hand, and the smell of molasses soaks into your pores like a promise. The pancakes arrive with butter melting in slow-motion ridges. You eat slowly, deliberately. Meals on this journey have become less about hunger and more about belonging. Charlie gets oats and a leftover crust, which he accepts with regal gratitude. You brush his coat under the wide maple outback while the sun climbs above the tree line, mist lifting from the fields like it's being exhaled by the earth. You set out just after 8 a.m. The road south hums beneath the wheels, and every part of you feels present. Your muscles are tuned to the buggy's rhythm. The reins settle in your fingers like an extension of thought. Charlie walks with a confidence that wasn't there weeks ago. You've both grown into the road and into each other. The morning stretches like a lullaby. The trees begin to thin slightly, revealing long sloping pastures. Autumn's slow invasion is more obvious now, burnished edges on the sugar maples, an occasional cascade of yellow leaves drifting lazily across your path. Each descent brings a new smell. Dried grass, turned soil, distant chimney smoke. Vermont is starting to close up shop for the year, and you're here just in time to catch the last chapter. You pass through towns with names that sound older than memory. Corinth, Fairleigh, Thetford. Each has a post office, a steeple, and a general store that seems to double as local gossip central. You wave at two men playing checkers on the porch of one such store. They wave back, but don't pause their game. Like this moment, this dusty traveler is part of the routine. In line, you pull over to let a group of college runners pass. Dartmouth students, probably. They shout greetings as they run past, the sound of their feet like distant applause. One girl calls out, "You're the coolest thing I've seen all day." And you grin. Charlie snorts, unimpressed. Hanover rolls into view like a stage set, orderly, thoughtful, and proud,
The college green is dappled in shadow and laughter. Students lie in small clusters, books open but unread. The statue of Daniel Webster watches over it all with a well-worn nose, shiny from decades of superstitious touches. You don't stop long, just enough to grab a warm muffin from a cafe where the chalkboard reads, "Yes, we have pumpkin everything." Historians still argue whether the Ivy League safeguarded learning or enshrined elitism. Dartmouth, born from a mission to educate Native American youth, swiftly turned to shaping colonial aristocracy instead. Some of that tension still whispers through the trees. You overhear a debate outside the library. Can an institution built on exclusion truly teach freedom? A student nods solemnly. The question hangs in the air like unfinished homework. Outside Hanover, the land shifts again. The upper valley cradles the road in gentle arms. Mist rises from the Connecticut River in slow plumes, drifting across meadows like sleepwalking spirits. You stop at a bend where the view demands silence. The river snakes through fields and soft hills, silver and ancient. You take out your journal, but not to write, just to hold it. Sometimes holding the memory is enough. Later, a cyclist catches up to you. He's breathless, older, with a backpack full of hard-boiled eggs and trail mix. He offers you one in exchange for a story. You trade. You tell him about the ghost cat in the hayloft, and he laughs so hard he nearly drops his bike. Then he tips his helmet and rides on, calling back, "The road is friendlier because you're on it." By afternoon, Windsor greets you like an old relative. Wooden porches, tidy gardens, and the long rumbling hush of the Cornish-Windsor covered bridge. It stretches across the river like a poem you only half remember. The interior is shadowed and echoing, your buggy wheels on old timber, Charlie's hooves sparking soft thunder. You ride through slowly, breathing the mingled scent of old wood and sun-warmed dust. On the other side, the world opens again. Broad fields, a scattering of grazing cattle, and one red barn that seems to wink at you with a crooked weather vane. You find a farmhouse just outside town, marked with a hand-painted sign. "Buggy campers welcome. Kindness free." A young couple runs it, along with 3 dogs, 2 kids, and 1 friendly goat named Wallace. They offer you a patch of flat earth, a bowl of stew, and conversation that never feels forced. You eat under the stars with a flannel blanket draped around your shoulders. The goat tries to nibble your journal. As the night deepens, someone brings out a fiddle. A quiet tune floats across the fields, half lullaby, half memory. The children fall asleep against their parents. Charlie dozes nearby. Wallace curls up at your feet, snoring like a lawnmower wrapped in a sweater. Before bed, you write in your journal. The road doesn't just carry you forward. Sometimes it loops back quietly to the parts of you that needed healing. You close the book and lie back in the hay. The air is cooler now, a sign of the season's turn. The stars blink above like they're watching, just for you. The barn creaks, Charlie snuffles, and sleep, like everything else on this journey, arrives gently and stays.
The road that leads you home isn't straight. It ambles, coils, and sometimes shrugs like it forgot where it was going. But that's fine by you. After nearly 14,000 miles of dust and wonder, you're in no hurry. Charlie senses it too. His gait is looser now, almost joyful, like even he knows that this last leg of the journey should be savored. You pass through the quiet farmlands of Mason, where the hills glow with that particular golden warmth only September can manage. Dry grasses bend under the weight of the season, and every breeze carries the faint rustle of leaves rehearsing their fall. There's something sacred in how the sun slips between the trees, spotlighting little shrines of wildflowers and crumbling fences forgotten by time.
You pause at a split-rail fence to share an apple with Charlie. He chomps happily. You chew thoughtfully. It's tart, but honest, like the journey itself. The sky, meanwhile, plays its usual tricks. It begins as a flawless blue, but by midday, it's stacked with clouds that look like the hems of enormous wool skirts dragging across the heavens. Somewhere distant, thunder grumbles. You tighten the oilcloth over your luggage and tip your hat to the wind. A farmer waves from a field, one arm resting on the wooden handle of a scythe. He's shirtless and sun-worn, and you imagine he's been standing in that same exact posture since the 1880s. You wave back and wonder whether he waves to every traveler or just the ones who seem to belong more to the past than the present. At one point, you take a wrong turn. A charming one, though, the kind that delivers you onto a dirt path flanked by stone walls and lilac bushes. You follow it out of stubborn curiosity until it dead ends at an abandoned schoolhouse. The bell is long gone, the windows half boarded, but something about the silence around it feels educational. You sit on the steps and snack on a heel of bread while Charlie grazes nearby. For once, the clock doesn't matter. Later, as you approach Pepperell, you cross paths with a group of local boys fishing from a covered bridge. One of them points at Charlie and asks, "Is that a racing horse?" You laugh and say, "Only if someone's chasing him with a frying pan." They erupt into the kind of laughter that fills your chest like a warm drink. You leave them still giggling, their fishing lines swaying like lullabies above the water. The towns become more familiar now. You begin to recognize roof lines, weather vanes, even oddly shaped trees you hadn't realized you'd remembered. Nostalgia doesn't arrive in grand waves. It sneaks up in snippets. The smell of cedar, a bend in the road, a dog barking behind a fence you once passed. You pull into Groton just as the sun begins to blush against the western edge of the sky. The streets are calm, glowing with that soft, theatrical light that flatters everything. Children play jump rope outside a corner store. An old man nods at you from his rocking chair, raising a hand as if to say, "Well, I'll be." You stay the night at a small house-turned-inn run by a widow who wears 3 shawls and makes the best potato soup in Massachusetts. She asks you no questions, just offers you a bowl, a towel, and a quiet place to sleep. Her kindness feels like a punctuation at the end of a long sentence. In the morning, the sky opens wide and clear. The final stretch awaits. You can feel it in your bones, like a song reaching its last verse. The road narrows slightly as you approach your original starting point. The air smells different, sharper somehow, or maybe it's just the awareness that you've come full circle. Each footfall of Charlie's hooves feels like a heartbeat counting down. You pass the sign for South Lancaster. It's almost comical the way it sneaks up on you. No trumpets, no banners, just a name painted slightly crooked on an old wooden board. You pause there, not because you have to, just because it feels right. You get down from the buggy and walk a short distance alongside Charlie. The reins rest loosely in your hand. You talk to him quietly, something about how proud you are of him, how many miles he carried you without complaint. He flicks his ears like he understands. Then you remount. The last half-mile drifts by like a dream. Houses you remember are still standing. A gate creaks open the same way it did 2 years ago. The world you left behind never paused, but it didn't forget you either. And then you're there. The house, the porch, the same steps you left with a full journal and an empty map. Now the journal is bursting and the map, well, it's mostly illegible from water damage and pencil scribbles, but that doesn't matter. You step down. The reins fall slack. Charlie snorts and lowers his head as if to say, "We made it." And you did. You walk inside and drop your satchel on the floor. The walls greet you like old friends. You sit, just for a moment, and take off your boots. The dust is still on them. You leave it there. Later that evening, you sit on the porch. The stars blink above. The wind stirs the trees gently. And inside you, something shifts. The journey is over, but the road never really ends. Not for someone who knows how to follow it.
You wake to quiet. Not the kind of quiet that hangs in the woods before dawn, or the hush of snow falling outside a country inn window. This is a different kind, thicker, more permanent, the quiet of return. Charlie is already up, his ears twitching at the birdsong just outside your window. The familiar walls around you feel smaller than you remember, but not in a bad way, more like a sweater that used to be loose and is now comfortably worn in. You run your hand along the window sill, feel the same notches in the wood, the same view of the eastern sky, but you're not the same person looking out. You don't leap out of bed. There's no morning goal, no map to check, no buggy to load. You lie there for a few extra breaths, listening to the creak of the house settling and the distant clop of hooves from someone else's wagon on the road. For the first time in 2 years, the road is no longer yours. That realization lands gently, but deeply. Eventually, you rise. The floorboards greet your feet with familiar creaks. You make tea, not because you're in a rush, but because you want the warmth. The kettle whistles, the spoon clinks against the cup, and the aroma of dried herbs, gathered from who knows which garden along the way, fills the small kitchen like a memory. You find yourself standing in the doorway, cup in hand, watching the sunlight fall across Charlie in the pasture. His coat has darkened slightly from all the months in the sun, and he moves with the confidence of a creature who has earned every muscle. You brush him slowly, letting your fingers trace the contours of his neck, the old saddle spots, the new scars, each one a chapter. He nudges you once with his nose, then gets back to the serious business of munching clover. You lean against the fence and smile. A neighbor stops by. He squints at you like he's trying to remember something. Thought you were in Kansas or some such. You grin. Only Maine. And then back again. Well, he says, adjusting his hat. World's a circle, I guess. That night, you finally allow yourself to unpack. You start with the satchel of journals, 12 volumes, each one more weathered than the last. The edges are frayed, pages crinkled, some corners still hold flecks of mud or pressed leaves. You flip through the first few, watching your own handwriting shift from neat and reserved to wild, loopy scrawls as the miles passed. There are days where you wrote nothing at all, just a sketch or a phrase like, met a baker with purple shoes, laughed all afternoon, or rained all day, nearly quit, Charlie wouldn't let me. You pause at one page where the ink has run slightly, like it was written in the rain. A farmhouse on a hill. Apple pie. Candlelight. No one asked where I came from, just if I was hungry. You remember that kitchen, the warmth, the woman's laugh, the cat that curled up on your lap and refused to move. Later, you unfold the maps. They're patched, faded, torn in places, scribbled with arrows and margin notes, and the occasional sarcastic comment. Bridge out, again. Avoid this road unless you like mud in your socks. You trace the route with your finger, surprised at how much of it you remember just by feel. And then come the little things. A pine cone from a Maine forest, a button given to you by a child who thought you were a hero, a scrap of red ribbon tied to the handle of your trunk by a woman who said, "So you always find your way home." You hadn't understood the gift until now. The next few days are full of slow, strange rhythms. You visit the post office. There are a few letters. One from someone you met only once, signed simply, "You inspired me." Another from a cousin you haven't heard from in years, saying they saw your name in a Vermont newspaper. People stop you in the street with questions. Did you really sleep in a barn in New Hampshire? Is it true you crossed the border without telling the guard? Did Charlie get sick in Connecticut? You answer some of them, leave others to legend. Some stories are better when they grow on their own. You write letters too. To the school teacher in Quebec who gave you shelter during a storm,
to the old man who sang lullabies to his cows in Vermont. You don't expect replies. It's just your way of tying up loose ends or letting them drift peacefully into the past. One afternoon, you walk to the bakery down the road. The new girl behind the counter doesn't know you, doesn't know the road you rode in on. You buy a roll and sit outside on the bench. The dough is soft, the air is sweet, and you smile at the thought that maybe, just maybe, someone else is hitching their buggy right now, wondering if they'll ever find a place like this. Historians still argue whether it's the travelers who shape the world or the world that shapes the traveler, whether motion brings wisdom or merely motion sickness. But sitting there, watching the clouds curl like smoke against the blue, you think maybe it's not about the shape at all. Maybe it's just about the movement. That evening, a storm rolls in, the first you've watched from this porch in over 2 years. You sit beneath the awning with the wool blanket around your shoulders, listening to the low growl of thunder, the sudden hiss of rain, the rhythmic patter on the roof. It doesn't feel like a disruption. It feels like a lullaby. You think about the places you stayed dry under leaking roofs, the times Charlie stood patient while you adjusted the tarp for the 10th time, the strangers who became friends because the storm made you wait. As the rain deepens, you open the last journal. There's a blank page at the end. You stare at it for a long time. Then you write, "The road ends, but not the story." You close the book, press your palm to the cover, and let out a long, soft breath. Later in bed, you listen to the storm fading into nothing. The fan hums low. The world outside is exactly as it should be. Charlie sighs once in his sleep, and somewhere nearby, an owl calls out into the night. You whisper, almost without thinking, "We made it." And for the first time since coming home, you sleep without dreaming of wheels on gravel.
And now the journey slows, not with a jolt, but with a sigh. You've walked dusty roads and quiet trails. You've heard the clatter of hooves on cobblestone and the hush of snow falling outside unfamiliar windows. You sipped coffee brewed over campfires, listened to strangers' laughter in kitchens you never seen before, and somehow all of it is now part of you. Let your breath deepen. Let your shoulders fall. The miles are behind you, but the rhythm of the road still hums gently in your chest. That gentle sway of the buggy, the creak of wooden wheels, the soft snort of a tired horse at dusk. It lingers like the echo of a lullaby. And wherever you are now, tucked beneath your own roof, curled under your own blanket, maybe with a fan whispering softly or a breeze tapping the window, know this: the road gave you something it never intended to take back. Not just stories, not just memories, but a quiet strength, a stillness you earned with every step. So close your eyes, traveler. Feel the warm weight of the blanket, the safety of walls that know your name, the hush of the night inviting you to rest. There are no directions to check, no towns to find, no bridges to cross. Just you, safe at last. Let your breath slow. Let the stars blink gently above you like old friends keeping watch. And let the world fade, piece by piece, like a lantern dimming after midnight. The journey is complete, and now you rest.